In the late 20th century, Colombia was not at war with another country. It was at war with a man. His name was Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. For more than a decade, his decisions shaped daily life across an entire nation. Judges woke up wondering if today would be the day they were killed. Police officers kissed their children goodbye, unsure if they would return home. Politicians weighed every word they spoke, knowing the wrong sentence could be fatal. Escobar was not a president. He was not a general. He held no official authority. And yet, he commanded more power than most governments. At the height of his influence, Pablo Escobar controlled the majority of the cocaine entering the United States. His organization generated so much money that accounting became meaningless. Cash was stacked in warehouses, buried in fields, hidden in walls, and stuffed into suitcases. Millions of dollars were destroyed every month by moisture, mold, and rats. Those losses barely mattered. What mattered was control. Escobar understood something fundamental about power. Money alone is not enough. Money must be paired with fear. Fear silences opposition. Fear creates obedience. Fear turns institutions hollow from the inside. And Escobar weaponized fear with precision. He bribed police officers. He bribed judges. He bribed politicians. And when bribery failed, he ordered executions. His philosophy was brutally simple and terrifyingly effective. Plata o plomo. Silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. To some, Pablo Escobar was a terrorist responsible for mass murder and national trauma. To others, particularly the poor, communities of Medellín, he was remembered differently. He built homes. He funded soccer fields. He paid hospital bills. He handed out cash to people who had been ignored their entire lives. This contradiction became central to his legend. Escobar was both benefactor and butcher, protector and predator, hero and villain. But this story is not about the myth. It is about the reality. Because behind every act of generosity was a calculation. And behind every public project was a criminal empire fueled by addiction, violence, and death. To understand how Pablo Escobar became the most powerful drug trafficker in history, we must return to the city that shaped him. A city divided by wealth. A city defined by inequality. A city called Medellín. Aced 2. Origins. Medellín and the making of a criminal. Pablo Escobar was born on December 1st, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia. He was raised in Medellín, a city undergoing rapid growth but suffering deep social division. His father worked as a farmer. His mother was a schoolteacher. They lived modestly, with limited resources but relative stability. Medellín in the 1950s and 60s was a city of extremes. Wealth existed, but it was concentrated. Opportunity existed, but it was guarded. For many young men born into poverty, upward mobility felt impossible. Crime filled the gap. Escobar showed ambition early. Not academic ambition, but personal ambition. He wanted respect. He wanted influence. And above all, he wanted control over his own fate. As a teenager, he drifted toward petty crime. He sold stolen goods. He forged documents. He smuggled cigarettes. He participated in small theft operations. None of it was especially profitable, but it was instructive. He learned how systems could be exploited. He learned how authority could be avoided. He learned how silence could be bought. And he learned something else. Violence worked. By his early 20s, Escobar escalated. He became involved in car theft rings, extortion schemes, and kidnappings. At least one early kidnapping ended in murder, marking a point of no return. Violence was no longer a risk. It was a tool. Around this time, the global drug market was changing. Marijuana had dominated the trade, but cocaine was emerging as something far more lucrative. It was compact. It was easy to transport. And demand in the United States was rising rapidly, fueled by wealth, nightlife, and a growing culture of excess. Colombia was perfectly positioned. Escobar recognized the opportunity immediately. He aligned himself with other traffickers, including Carlos Lader and the Ochoa brothers. These were not street criminals. They were organizers, strategists, men who understood logistics, distribution, and profit margins. Together they began experimenting. Small planes carried cocaine over the Caribbean. Remote airstrips appeared in the Bahamas and Florida. Chemists refined cocaine to meet American demand. Smuggling routes multiplied. What began as scattered operations quickly evolved into a coordinated system. The Medellín Cartel was forming. Escobar's role became clear. He was not the best pilot. He was not the best chemist. He was not even the best strategist. But he was fearless. He enforced loyalty without hesitation. He punished betrayal instantly. And he was willing to do what others would not. People noticed. By the late 1970s, Escobar had become indispensable. He handled enforcement. He handled intimidation. He handled problems. And problems disappeared. As cocaine profits exploded, so did Escobar's wealth. He reinvested aggressively. He bought properties. He bought vehicles. He bought weapons. Most importantly, he bought people. Pilots were paid fortunes. Chemists were protected. Enforcers were rewarded. Families of loyal men were taken care of. Fear created discipline. Money created loyalty. Together they created an empire. By the early 1980s, cocaine flooded the United States. Nightclubs, boardrooms, and movie sets consumed it in staggering quantities. Demand became insatiable, and Pablo Escobar was ready to meet it. But money brings attention, and attention brings danger. Escobar understood that guns alone would not protect him. He needed legitimacy. He needed power that looked legal. And so, he turned toward politics. Act 3. Peak power. Money, politics, and terror. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was no longer just wealthy. He was untouchable. The Medellín Cartel was moving enormous quantities of cocaine into the United States every single week. Entire smuggling routes were now industrialized. Cocaine labs operated around the clock. Planes took off and landed continuously. Boats crossed the Caribbean under cover of darkness. Trucks moved product across borders with ease. The scale was unprecedented. Escobar's organization was earning hundreds of millions of dollars each year. Some estimates placed his personal fortune in the billions. Forbes magazine listed him among the richest people in the world, a drug trafficker ranked beside legitimate industrialists and financiers. But wealth alone did not satisfy Escobar. He wanted acceptance. He wanted respect. He wanted to be untouchable in the open. So he stepped into politics. Escobar began funding campaigns and donating heavily to public projects. He portrayed himself as a self-made businessman who cared deeply about Colombia's poor. In the slums of Medellín, he built housing developments for families who had been living in cardboard shacks. He paid for schools, soccer fields, and community centers. For many residents, Pablo Escobar was the first powerful man who had ever shown them any kindness. That loyalty mattered. Escobar was elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress, a symbolic but significant position. For a moment, it appeared that he had successfully crossed into legitimacy. But the illusion did not last. Journalists began investigating his background. Evidence of his drug trafficking surfaced. Reports connected him directly to the Medellín Cartel. Public pressure mounted, and Escobar was forced out of Congress in disgrace. He was furious. Humiliation for Escobar was unforgivable. What followed was not retaliation. It was war. Escobar turned his full attention against the Colombian state. Judges who issued warrants against him were assassinated. Journalists who exposed his crimes were murdered. Police officers were gunned down in the streets, sometimes simply for wearing a uniform. Medellín descended into chaos. Car bombs exploded in crowded areas. Police stations were attacked. Government buildings were destroyed. Entire neighborhoods lived in constant fear of sudden violence. By 1991, Colombia was exhausted. Years of bombings, assassinations, and constant fear had pushed the country to the edge. Public pressure mounted on the government to end the violence at almost any cost. Behind closed doors, negotiations began. Pablo Escobar made his position clear. He would surrender, but only on his terms. There would be no extradition to the United States. There would be no foreign prison, and he would choose where he was held. The Colombian government agreed. What followed was one of the most controversial decisions in modern Colombian history. Escobar was imprisoned in a custom-built facility known as La Catedral, located on a hillside overlooking Medellín. Officially, it was a prison. In reality, it was a fortress designed for comfort and control. Inside La Catedral, Escobar lived like a king. There were private rooms. There was a bar. There was a soccer field. There were parties. The guards were selected by Escobar himself. They answered to him, not the state. From inside the compound, he continued to run his criminal empire almost uninterrupted. Orders were given. Money moved. Rivals were summoned. Some never left. At least 2 of Escobar's associates were tortured and murdered inside La Catedral, their deaths hidden from public view. The prison, meant to contain violence, had become another tool of it. As details emerged, public outrage exploded. Colombians realized they had not imprisoned a criminal. They had legitimized him. International pressure increased. The government, embarrassed and cornered, attempted to regain control. Plans were made to transfer Escobar to a real prison under military guard. Escobar learned of the plan before it could be executed. On July 22, 1992, Pablo Escobar escaped. There was no gunfight. There was no resistance. There was barely an attempt to stop him. The illusion collapsed. The war resumed immediately. Act 4. The Manhunt, a king in hiding. After his escape, Pablo Escobar was no longer a ruler. He was a fugitive. The Colombian government, humiliated and under international scrutiny, committed fully to capturing him. A joint task force was formed, combining elite Colombian police units with American intelligence and surveillance technology. This time, there would be no negotiations. Phones were tapped. Signals were traced. Informants were paid. Escobar's world began to shrink. Safe houses were raided. Money caches were seized. Trusted lieutenants were arrested or killed. At the same time, a shadow war emerged. A vigilante group known as Los Pepes, short for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar, began, systematically hunting anyone associated with him. Former allies, family friends, and lawyers were targeted. Properties were destroyed. Bodies were left as warnings. Escobar was being dismantled from both sides. He grew paranoid. He stopped trusting even his closest guards. He moved constantly, sleeping in different locations every night. His once vast communication network collapsed. Phones were dangerous. Messages were delayed. Control slipped away. The man who once ruled Colombia now hid in empty houses, listening to police radios, waiting. Then he made a mistake. He called his family. The conversation lasted only minutes, but it was enough. Authorities intercepted the signal. Triangulation narrowed the location. The hunt was over. Act 6. Death, Aftermath, and Legacy. On December 2, 1993, Colombian police surrounded a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín. Inside one of the houses was Pablo Escobar. When officers moved in, Escobar attempted to flee. He climbed through a window and ran across the rooftops, carrying a gun. Shots rang out. Neighbors watched from behind locked doors. Moments later, it was over. Pablo Escobar was dead. Whether he was killed by police gunfire or took his own life remains debated. What is not debated is the outcome. The most powerful drug trafficker in history had fallen. Not in a palace, but on a rooftop. Photographs of his body spread quickly. Some celebrated, others mourned. Many simply felt relief. The war, it seemed, was finally over. But Escobar's death did not end the cocaine trade. New cartels rose. Violence continued, though never again at the same scale. Colombia began a slow and painful recovery. Institutions strengthened. Cities rebuilt. Generations processed trauma. And Escobar became a symbol. To some, he remains a folk hero. To others, a terrorist. To history, a warning. He built homes and destroyed lives. He gave money and took everything else. He proved that fear can buy power, but it cannot sustain it. No empire built on violence lasts forever. And Pablo Escobar's empire collapsed the moment the fear turned against him.